Hi, this is Dr. Nelson with Freedom Healthcare, your Utah wellness doc. Today I want to talk about intermittent fasting. A lot of people are hearing about this these days. A lot of people are doing it, and it's actually quite effective if used properly. But there's a bit of a confusion between true intermittent fasting and what's just called timed eating. A lot of people do timed eating where they have a window of eating through the day, say from 1 or 2 to 5 o'clock. And they don't eat outside this time, and they call this intermittent fasting. This is not actually intermittent fasting. This really should just be called timed eating. Now, timed eating is great because it helps reduce our overall caloric intake, and especially if we combine timed eating with a whole foods kind of diet, whether it's a whole foods keto diet, a whole foods Atkins style diet, a whole foods low glycemic Mediterranean style diet, or whatever. But let's talk about what the difference is between this timed eating and true intermittent fasting. To really get into this intermittent fasting, which unlocks more fat burning potential, you actually have to fast for 24 to 36 hours at least twice a week. Some people will go clear to 3 times a week. And it's a little difficult for some people. The first 2 weeks are very difficult. Because they feel really kind of drained of energy for a little bit. And one key thing to remember, that if you're over age 30 and trying to do intermittent fasting, it becomes much more difficult if your hormones are much lower than they used to be. And so that's a whole other discussion about hormone replacement and the whys and the benefits for it. And hormones start to take a downward turn at age 30, 35 in everyone. So the farther out you are beyond that and trying to do the difficult intermittent fasting, it becomes much easier when your hormones are at optimal levels. So let's talk about, intermittent fasting, we said 24 to 36 hours, at least twice a week. Let's talk about why that works, okay? To understand that, we need to understand how our body uses food and insulin and how it stores energy. So what I've drawn here is a blood vessel and just 3 cells. These could be brain cells, muscle cells, intestine cells, whatever. 3 cells in our body. And these little Ys here, these are what's called insulin receptors. So insulin will come in and attach to that receptor and do its job. So to understand this, we eat food, it gets down into our stomach, it starts to digest, it gets into our intestines, it micro-digests, and then it absorbs into our bloodstream. So let's just talk sugar right now. We do absorb fats and sugars and proteins, but let's just say this is a sugar molecule floating around in our blood after we've eaten. These various sugar molecules here. When this blood flows past the pancreas recognizes that you've just eaten, and the pancreas will produce insulin molecules. Okay, and when an insulin molecule gets into the insulin receptor, that's the job then is to pull the sugar into the cell so the cell can use the sugar for energy or store it for later usage. Well, the problem with the common American diet is that we consume way too much sugar in all of our food. And then the pancreas reaction is to do what it's supposed to do, make insulin. So the pancreas makes a lot more insulin. The insulin gets in these insulin receptors, and then it's just shoving this sugar into the cell the best it can. So let's draw a cell here full of sugar. Okay, so when our cells get packed with sugar like this, and imagine all of our cells are full of sugar, you may have heard of the term insulin resistance, where type 2 diabetes is that their insulin doesn't work like it should. Well, it's a bit of a misnomer because really the problem is the insulin's working. There's a ton of insulin and all the insulin receptors are full of insulin, but the real problem is that the cell is so full of sugar it just can't take anymore. And then the sugar starts to back up into our blood and we get even more sugar and therefore more insulin from the pancreas. And it's kind of like if you're going to go on a trip and you don't want to check a bag because that costs $50 more, so you just take your carry-on bag, but you want to get a lot of clothes in there. So you're shoving clothes in there the best you can, and pretty soon this carry-on bag is full of clothes, and you're like, let me just get 3 more t-shirts in there. And it's not like your arm is broken, which can be the insulin receptor. Your arm is still working. It's just the cell, the suitcase is totally full. You just can't fit any more in there. So the insulin is working, the insulin receptors are working. You just can't fit any more sugar into these cells. Now, the problem with this excessive insulin then is excessive insulin equals fat storage. So when we become packed full of sugar, then our blood becomes packed full of insulin, and insulin is incredibly good at storing fat. So, intermittent fasting, why does it work? There's something about getting to the 24 to 36 hour time frame that really starts to burn up this sugar and allow it to get back out and be used by other cells in the body, and just reduce the overall sugar overload that we've got going on in our bodies. Once we reduce our sugar, then we also, the pancreas's reaction is that you don't need as much insulin. And so you reduce the amount of insulin you're producing. And once again, excessive insulin equals fat storage. If you can reduce your overall insulin spikes and your overall 24-hour insulin load, you will start to burn fat. And that is why 24 to 36 hour intermittent fasting really works. One thing you can do to help tolerate the 24 to 36 hours, you have to stay hydrated. If you get behind on your hydration, you will just be exhausted and you won't be able to tolerate the fasting. Another thing is electrolytes. Okay, you can get electrolyte mixes, but you want to be careful that they do not have sweeteners in them that will cause an insulin response. So no sugars mixed in your electrolytes. So you can't do things like Gatorade or Powerade or things like that. If you can find pure electrolyte drinks or bone broth, things like that, to get some electrolytes, that will help you tolerate the 24-hour to 36-hour fasting. If you have any other questions about fasting or hormone replacement and why that enhances your ability to tolerate the fasting, come on into Freedom Healthcare, give us a call. We'd love to talk more about this with you.